Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live, and of course Steve Rosenberg is sharing Russian news right now, talking about how that Russia is warning of a direct military confrontation between Russia and the U.S. and Syria, and accuses America of preparing to light the fuse of carnage. Let me play Steve Rosenberg for you here real quick and what he's saying. Hopefully we won't have any problems there. Then we're going to double back over to Syria. What's going on over there? I know there's a lot of questions as to whether or not President Bashar al-Assad's brother was involved or injured in that attack. I'll share with you in just a moment some information about that as well. Let's see if we can back up and pick this up
Russia's most popular daily newspaper comes
with Steve Rosenberg.
Kremlin paper is portraying the situation in and around Syria, and it's portraying it as highly explosive. So the headline of this article today is, there is a danger that the Middle East will explode in flames. The paper says,
sorry about the delay in this.
That, in and around Syria, a serious mess is brewing, which could lead to a new regional war. Who does the paper blame? Well, unsurprisingly,
America.
The paper says that America is preparing to light the fuse
of carnage
in the Middle East.
Just kind of basic, we'll give this a rundown here because Steve Rosenberg, it's not on his site there. I think it's because we're running live. We're not able to play the video very well here. But Steve Rosenberg is saying here that, and in fact, that the Russian newspaper, one of their main papers there, was stating today that it's about to become a global confrontation and, of course, a direct confrontation with the United States in the Middle East there. I keep being reminded in my mind of Nathan, the young Israeli boy who had a near-death experience, who spoke about Syria would be the flashpoint. It would be a battle that would break out between the United States and Russia. It would last about 2 weeks before it turns into a nuclear confrontation, and it would be a limited nuclear confrontation, both countries being hit by nuclear weapons, and of course a mass loss of life in the millions, as this young man stated there. There's a lot of people that don't like what he stated there. A lot of people have different opinions about it, but it's certainly very viable that these things could happen in a very near future. And of course, Steve Rosenberg is making this statement here, but there's a lot of other information that is letting us know that this could spiral out of control. Before I actually go to Ukraine, let me share with you the Russian Navy's warplanes started a massive drill in the Mediterranean, along with about almost a dozen Russian warships, submarines that are in the region there that have moved into the Mediterranean. And Russia's choice of doing war games at this particular time is only a show of force to the United States and the NATO allies there, which would be France and maybe even Germany and Great Britain, that might join in a battle against Russia over Syria. You know, there's also been evidence that has come out back years ago when the first Prime Minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, actually talked about that Syria would be divided in a conflict in the future, and how that in this division, Turkey would get half of Syria and Israel would take the other half. That's something I need to do a little bit more work on to get you the evidence for this, but that has actually been stated before. So the big issue going on right now is the war games there, and again, that's Russia showing its force after John Bolton, those of you that remember when he visited Israel, warned that if the Syrian government uses chemical weapons, they would pay a heavy price for this. And as I mentioned to you 6 days ago, here on Israeli News Live, our own friends in the intelligence community in Israel had already been sharing with us as something, well, the poop was about to hit the fan. That's the rated G version of what I was told. And no particular directive on this, other than to my suspicion that it would be Iranian targets inside of Israel, seeing as the Prime Minister had already stated, that's Prime Minister Netanyahu, that Israel would use all of its military might to take out Iranian targets inside of Israel. Now, We know that also just from the fact of Reuters and Newsweek 2 days ago was talking about Iran moving missiles from their country into Iraq and then from Iraq into to Israel. This has been the speculation. Iranian media actually disagrees with this and says they've never done it. But I wouldn't be a bit surprised that Iran has actually done this. Some speculation says that it comes out of North Korea. Maybe, maybe not. I can't say that either. But both Newsweek and Reuters both have reported this 2 days ago. And not only that, though, we have the fact that the President Bashar al-Assad has made an agreement with Iran to help rebuild their military at the conclusion of the war here. So they may already have begun that very initiative. And those missiles may be coming in. We also know that Iran, Syria, and Iraq are both working together to try to defeat ISIS in the eastern part of Syria. But they have been held back by the United States. It seems that the deep state of the United States does not want ISIS targeted whatsoever in the eastern part of the province there, so they have hampered those operations. It's one reason why you've been seeing more and more at the State Department talking about making agreements with the Iraqi government. The United States is very fearful that if Iraq, Syria, and Iran join together with the backing of Russia, it could become a much more difficult war to defeat than just the situation of Russia and Syria. Nonetheless, I do believe that Iran is going to be targeted by Israel in the coming days. If not, it was already started last night. There is conflicting reports on that, though. The Syrian government, one source says that it was actually a wire issue that caused the explosion. And of course, there were other sources inside of Syria saying, no, it was an Israeli strike on the actual munitions storage facility. Now, I kind of believe that second idea more so. But then there comes the idea that Bashar al-Assad's brother, Mayor al-Assad, was actually injured in this attack, if it was actually an Israeli attack that was carried out. Well, I did a little bit of researching on that just to see. And by the way, I know that on the 24th of August, he commands the 4th Brigade in Syria were deployed to Idlib province to prepare to take back Idlib. Now, it's not to say that Mayor al-Assad couldn't have made it back to Damascus for some reason and could have been injured in that attack. But one of the sources that I know that publicly actually stated about this was let me get his name for you real quick here, was someone that we actually, Eddie Cohen. I just was slipping my mind just for a moment. Eddie Cohen is an Israeli journalist in Israel who reports on the television news there. And I reached out to Eddie to find out what his source was, if he could even reveal it, that indeed Mayor al-Assad had been injured in this attack. And he said to me that he was not injured in the attack. He said he had reported it, he said earlier, assuming that it may be so from someone that he had heard, but he said there's still no evidence from Syria or any other groups that Mayor al-Assad was actually injured in the blast. Again, not to say that he's not. It's President Bashar al-Assad's last brother that he has. The other two have both died already, very early deaths. So, and of course, we know that Bashar al-Assad will definitely, the president of Syria, will be a target in any kind of strike, whether it be by the U.S. or Israel in the very near future. Because after all, they want to make sure they fulfill General Wesley Clark's truth story about these nations being taken down. They still want that to come about. They don't like the idea that Russia might somehow or another save the Syrian government from a total collapse. It's one reason why I believe that the biblical prophecy, when you look at this from prophecy, that Ben-Hadad, he would have recovered. But you know, there was just an evil guy in the group there. And he wasn't about to let Ben-Hadad recover. And Elisha wept bitterly over this, because he knew that when Syria fell in the hands of this evil, wicked man, that they would bring the most horrible crimes against the state of Israel that Israel had ever seen, the house of Israel in particularly. And I have a feeling that that biblical prophecy then may be mirrored today. And that Elisha's words then may ring true to today, when President Bashar al-Assad may fall victim to the very same scenario. He would have recovered, but unfortunately there were those that are in power that will not let that happen. Whether it's his death directly or just the death of the nation, and then they will install these thugs, this Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and all these other terrorists to run the power of the nation. Well, don't think that won't turn against the Israeli people in the future. It will. That's when Israel will face its worst scenario ever for our own population, because our government in Israel is making some of the worst decisions. But after all, biblical prophecy will bring about the coming of the Messiah, one way or the other. Continuing on as well, guys, on Twitter here, Petri Makila has pointed out that Russia's T-62 tanks in Kaminsky, they're right there in Ukraine, next to the Ukrainian border, have arrived from Siberia. Happened today, here on September 2nd, and by noon they were ready to march. Pretty west of the Vostok 2018 exercise. So Russia has their tanks right on the border of Ukraine there, part of an exercise drill going on, and it's not surprising seeing as the fact that also Ukraine too has a new 5th Tank Brigade being formed. And the fact that the latest statement coming from the State Department in the United States is that they're going to arm now the Ukrainian Navy and the Ukrainian Air Force. So the tensions in Ukraine are ratcheting up. We have the threat of a possible staged chemical attack by the White Helmets, who have been accused by both Russian and Syrian governments that they have kidnapped 44 children to be used in a staged chemical attack, which could mean that they actually lose their lives as a result. That way, the West has its own reasons to launch an attack against the Syrian government and to finish the job that they started. But will this bring about a global conflict? It very well could. And if Steve Rosenberg is correct, that may be exactly what we see, just like in the Russian headlines. A direct confrontation. It was Dabu 77 that released just recently, about a week ago, a 4-star U.S. general that says we're no longer safe in the mainland United States. There are forces that can attack us, whether it be by land or by air, by nuclear missiles. We are becoming more vulnerable. And the actions of our own administration, whether it be directed by the deep state or not, is neither here nor there. It is definitely putting us in a very serious situation. As I watch the State Department over and over accusing Assad of using chemical weapons against his own people, when the Turkish parliament itself, not just Aaron Erdem, but also the Justice Minister of Turkey, clearly presented the evidence before the Turkish parliament, police evidence of the arrest of the very individuals that were given the sarin gas by then Prime Minister Erdogan to be used against the civilian population in Syria. That is the most credible evidence ever presented in the case of the sarin gas that was used in 2013 inside of Syria, and it had nothing to do with Erdogan, even though Heather Nauert at the State Department continues to say it's not an argument. Assad gassed his own people. As long as we continue to believe propaganda and lies, we will be victims of a much greater war. And that's what's very sad. Why can't people just tell the truth? Just once, just one time in their lives, why can't they tell the truth? Stop being politicians. And let me say something to you, my friends that are listening. I know that we have Republicans, Democrats, probably Tea Party, every other type of background that watches from the United States. All right, I used to be a Republican myself. I finally decided there's not any of them good. I know this for a fact because after working in the intelligence community from 1983 to 1990, I know exactly what does go on. And I know that both Republicans and Democrats behind the scenes work together to cover each other's backs. So when they're laundering money and millions is being spent and made from drugs and arms sales and things of that nature, they each one have each other's back. Unless they decide to let one of them go to the wolves. But I've seen Republicans and Democrats together in conspiracies that not only defraud the nation, but as well wreak havoc on our population. That's where the real criminals are. And some of the people that I used to think were good presidents, I only learned later were some of the worst. So yes, they are guilty on both sides of the aisle. And they do work together. And when they talk about Putin, how he takes and they say that he silences his own people in his country, that are descendants against him that come and speak out against him, and the next thing you know, they end up disappearing. We have all those allegations about the Clintons to do the same. Well, let me tell you something. It's not limited to the Clintons. And it's not limited to the Democrats either. It's on both sides. And I don't need any hearsay to tell you that. I know so. Guys, it's a very serious situation. The Duran is also, article comes out. I don't know that much about the Duran, so I don't know how trustworthy this particular paper is. U.S. strategy in Syria, create quagmires until we get what we want. Well, that's true, regardless of what the source of the Duran is. This may be an old article, though. Let me just, no, it's actually September 2nd, 2018. 2013 top Obama administration officials described their policy in Syria war as one of keeping the war going. The administration wanted a big seat at the table for the political settlement, for which officials clarified meant ensuring that the war kept going so that there was never a clear victor. The Trump administration seems to be slipping into that same destructive set of priorities in Syria. The Washington Post this week quoted an unnamed administration official as saying that right now our job is to help create quagmires for Russia and the Syrian regime until we get what we want. Sure, I can believe that. And someone sent me the other day a video that President Trump spoke to the evangelical community, saying that he was the only one that ever stood for the Christian community here in the United States. Let me tell you something, friends. They're only trying to ensure that the Christian community stands behind the president because they need the Christian community, which is only the upper wealthy groups that they're talking about. It's not the everyday average Christian unless you're following these bunch of multi-millionaire evangelists out there, televangelists that are just sucking the life out of you so that they can drive their Bentleys and private jets, they can fly around the world and then go rub shoulders with the President of the United States and make like there's something great. They're all taking you to a new world order, and you have no idea about this. And it's amazing to me, just because someone prays and goes on to YouTube or Facebook and posts something like this, that people are just so gullible they swallow this down. This is not for our good at all. And I don't say Russia is any better, because it doesn't mean that Russia is any better. Putin may be fighting for a new world order as well. They work together behind the scenes. This is what I'm telling you. This is what I know. I've dealt with people in the intelligence community myself personally for 7 years, nearly almost 7 years. I dealt with people in the intelligence community in Israel, as well as also people with the United Nations. I know what their end game is, and I'm trying to warn you about it. And unfortunately, they're playing on the emotion of the Christian community to make sure that they keep the galvanized movement going. You know, all you have to do is watch President Trump when he tries to bring the troops out of Syria, or when he tries to make peace with Russia. and he says something wrong in the public eye, it's like they got a choke collar around him and they snatch on him and they say, "Heel, boy, heel." And then he comes out and barks a different tune. He recants his statements on a regular basis. Doesn't that tell you anything? Everything he said he wanted to do before the campaign, he's not been able to do. Somebody else controls his narrative. Do you think George Soros, for giving him just 4 years before he ran for president there, this millions of dollars debt? George Soros, the very man that funds all the riots and everything else, the destabilization of America? You know, his impeachment may be intentionally done because I know directly out of the White House they were looking for something that would cause the American public to go into a tizzy to create some kind of civil unrest that would justify disarming this nation. Do you ever think that maybe he's only playing a part so that they can disarm this nation? Guys, I know too much. I've seen how they work together in behind the scenes, what you don't see, and how they're best friends. Same thing goes on in global politics too. Other than maybe there are rifts between nations because this nation was supposed to get this. Same thing with Russia. They were supposed to get Ukraine as part of that New World Order deal. But then the U.S. comes in and stages a coup and takes it from them because the Vatican wanted it to be under the European rule because of the Roman Catholics in that part of the nation. That's why the Vietnam War was fought as well, by the way. To stop the Russians. They called it the communist. Well, the Vatican created the communist nation out of the state of Russia when at one time it was considered to be a Christian nation trying to spread Christianity through the Middle East. Oh, Rome couldn't have that. Crush that, give them communism, put a couple of Jesuits in power there, give them an atheistic belief. They would rather have an atheistic belief. That way they can get rid of everything that they don't agree with. They're going to turn the United States into a social welfare state, what's left of it. And you're going to find out you're going to be under a whole set of new laws that you never thought existed. Friends, we better wake up before it's too late. You want somebody to tell you the truth? Support the broadcast. I'm not very liked. And believe me, there's other people out there that are saying all the propaganda. And by the way, their sources are things that you overlook as well, the movement of arms and things like that. Don't say they don't have some intel community. But you know, have you ever thought about one thing? I want to share something with you. The sources that I have in the intel community, especially in Israel, are borderline believers. But they can't dare say that, because if they did, they wouldn't know anything. I've got several sources there. But I can tell you one thing. When you come from an Orthodox background, a Jewish background, if you are part of anything in Israel, and you become a believer in Yeshua, you would not have any more intel whatsoever. There is something that the Orthodox community just hates about a Jewish person believing that Yeshua is the Messiah. You become disowned. Unless maybe you're only playing a part. Maybe you're a front. You're a propaganda piece, and you play a part so that you can get the masses to follow the narrative. I don't have masses following a narrative. I don't have free reign of the internet and Google and everybody lifts up my videos and promotes what I'm doing. I don't have my videos translated in tons of languages because I have all the resources at my hands to be able to do it. You know, a time or two I had someone to volunteer to help translate in Spanish or something, and we had one sister that did it in German a little bit, but that's about it. And that's only on maybe 4 or 5 videos at the most. Because I'm not a propaganda machine. I don't have the unlimited resources of people in the background. I'm not training FEMA in America so that when they do decide to crush everything in this country, that they'll be well trained to be able to deal with us Christians that do believe Yeshua as the Messiah, that didn't go along with the Vatican narrative for a new world order. Use a little wisdom, friends. Use a little discernment. Don't be wooed into just believing anything. And you know, it's interesting because you can tell the truth, part of the truth, and then put a little bit of poison lie in there. People will believe it though if they got part of the truth. I'm not interested in playing games like that. If I know something, I'll tell you with all my heart. I'll tell you the truth the best way I can. And you guys already know. You tell me all the time. You don't even get the message I'm going live. But if I was part of that propaganda machine, you wouldn't have that problem, would you? My videos would come through. You'd be able to get that message. Hup, Steve's going live today. His video's out. And if I had a propaganda machine behind me, boy, I would have it translated in so many different languages so we could affect an entire global community. Get them ready for a new world order. You don't think I don't know these things? Let me tell you something. I know directly from members of the United Nations. I know people in the evangelical community in practically every aspect you can imagine that have infiltrated the evangelical community to do one thing, and that's to take you to a new world order. And I don't know that second-handedly either. I know it first-handedly. That's why I'm trying to warn you what's going on. And that's why I became an enemy of these people, because I would tell you the truth. And this is why they have done things they can do. They haven't removed me as of yet, but believe me, that time would come too, I'm sure. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. Our website is IsraeliNewsLive.org. Patreon.com. If you can't give on IsraeliNewsLive.org, you can support it also on Patreon.com. And of course, we also have our mailing address as well. And I'll just put that up on your screen. You know. That way, if you want to support this ministry, you can. And I trust that it is a blessing to you. And at the same time, I'm working still too on the book that I'm writing, and I'm thinking seriously about putting into a book form the thing I'm sharing with people across the nation, what's really going on in this country. On that, it'll be a very short book. What I'll do is I'll take recording and I'll try to get it transcribed. And this way here, I can, as we do these conferences, I won't be able to do it as early as September, though it's too soon. Maybe I could have it put together for the conference in Kansas City, to where I can put this in book form, put a little bit more detail in case I forget something in the conference itself, things that I can share with you, but so you'll see what's happening to this world. It's very troubling, and our politicians are the ones taking you there. They're not telling you. You know, I find it interesting too. I'll just share this little bit of tidbit with you as well. Watch closely. You know, they used to talk about, you know, how politicians were buying land down in South America and stuff. You know where they're really getting places at? It's the Far East. Not in Russia either. Like Indonesia, Philippines, places like that. This is where some of the wealthy people are going. I even know of rabbinical figures that have already moved there. You know why? They know what they're going to do to America. That was told to me by one of these, I can't say he's an elite, I just think he was part of that group, that shared details with me back when the coup with Erdogan happened. And I used to share those with you, what he would share with me. He told me then that the real safe place is not South America. He said it's the Far East. Places like and he specifically mentioned the Philippines and Indonesia. He said these will be your safe places. These will be the places that will have the better economy when everything falls apart. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Erev Tov. In a world that is truly Ein Shalom, there is no peace. Good evening.